Okay, right, well. Sorry. Is that better? Okay, great. Thank you. I think we've got it sorted. Jewish Voice for Labour was founded in July 2017, and we had our public launch here at the Labour Party conference that year. We did so as Jewish members of the Labour Party, attracted by the radical programme offered by Jeremy Corbyn, recently elected, then re-elected leader, against the hostility of the party machine, the majority of MPs, the old Blairites, and others. These others included Labour's Zionist affiliate, the so-called Jewish Labour Movement, which campaigned and voted against Corbyn on both occasions. Despite its name, it obviously does not speak for all Jews in the Labour Party. It cannot and does not speak for those of us who do not accept, for example, the centrality of Israel to Jewish life worldwide. It is not that Jews are naturally radical or naturally conservative, but as Murray Glickman argues in a post on our website this week, we have a particular history and a particular set of ethical traditions which have predisposed us historically towards being radical. We are obviously talking, as I say, of a predisposition, not an iron law, born in specific historical circumstances and changing for many Jews in Britain today. When Ed Miliband was leader of the Labour Party, round about 15% of Jews voted Labour, whereas in the post-war period, the vast majority of Jews and large numbers of MPs were Jewish radical members of the Labour Party. It's always attracted Jewish members. But we needed, we felt, a Jewish, not a Zionist voice for Labour. And if I can quote from a few of the things we said in our statement of aims, our political priorities are universal human rights and dignity, justice for all, freedom of expression and democracy in the Labour Party. Our mission is to contribute to making the Labour Party an open, democratic and inclusive party. As such, we aim to strengthen the party in its opposition to all forms of racism, including anti-Semitism, broadening the party's appeal to all sections of British society. We take inspiration from the long history of Jewish involvement in the socialist and trade union movements and in anti-racist and anti-fascist struggles. Nothing has changed. Just as many Jewish groups emerged in the wider society saying "not in my name" in relation to Israel in the past decades, so it was essential to have a Jewish voice standing out against the mad rush to label Labour as an unsafe space for Jews. It isn't, and it never has been. Except recently. Let me add, except recently, for us. Okay, fighting all forms of racism was always a key objective, but our work was increasingly focused on opposing what rapidly developed into a witch hunt, ostensibly for anti-Semites, but in practice largely of left-wingers, especially advocates for Palestinian rights. I can only repeat that the evidence shows that the incidence of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, while real, is small, certainly lower than in the Tory party and further to the right. Fewer than 0.4% of our members have been so accused, while popular perception, fed by the mainstream media, believes it to be 1 in 3. That is the scale of the exaggeration that has become the common sense of our time, and that some people like Jeremy Corbyn have had the temerity to challenge. Most of the accusations of anti-Semitism were actually about trenchant criticism of Israel in the face of its cruel wars on the Palestinians and its ongoing settler colonial encroachment on their lands. It is here that the highly contentious IHRA definition of anti-Semitism has done huge damage, eroding our right to free speech by feeding a culture of fear about saying anything at all on the topic of Israel. I'll say a bit more later. Most of the so-called anti-Semitism took the form of tropes on social media, the use of phrases and images which can sometimes be problematic, from cases we have seen A few showed real anti-Semitism, hatred of Jews, but more often they're the product of a lack of understanding of the issues rather than such hatred. We have no doubt that the only effective way of dealing with them is by open discussion, by education, with disciplinary action a last, not a first resort. Okay. Anti-Semitism, of course, needs to be discussed and opposed. The Jerusalem Declaration on Anti-Semitism, drafted recently by 200 plus Jewish studies academics worldwide, is a good place to start. Anti-Semitism, it says, is a form of racism, racism towards Jews, and defines it like this: anti-Semitism is discrimination, prejudice, hostility, or violence against Jews as Jews, or Jewish institutions as Jewish. It offered this in response to the widespread adoption of the IHRA definition, saying that the latter's effect, by bringing certain kinds of criticism of Israel into the definition of anti-Semitism, had been to sow confusion and generate controversy, hence weakening the fight against anti-Semitism. And when Labour had the temerity to interpret the IHRA definition, which it adopted under enormous pressure with a code of conduct to make sense of it, Labour was accused of being anti-Semitic for even daring to question what had arisen as a working draft document and was and is now treated as Holy Writ. There is no doubt that definition has had a chilling effect of discussion on Palestinian rights, precisely because they can't be discussed without mentioning Israel. Who dispossess the Palestinians? You cannot begin to tackle that question without treading on dangerous ground in the Labour Party today. What it has done is to render criticism of Israel suspect, likely to be anti-Semitic, unless and until you prove it is not. Let's try to put anti-Semitism in the context of racism in general, including anti-Palestinian racism in our society and our party, and look how Labour has chosen to tackle it. The evidence overall is patchy, but overwhelmingly concludes that prejudice is rife in our society, widespread in our society, of all kinds, that anti-black prejudice, anti-Muslim prejudice is enormous and widespread in the society. I'm not going to cite statistics to prove it, but I think we all know from experience the truth of this. It's clearly a problem in the Labour Party. Labour's response at every turn has been to focus, for instance, on the disruptive effects of the Black Lives Matter movement, the threat to law and order of the demolition of the Colston statue in Bristol, for example, not its liberatory potential. Black members feel increasingly disenchanted within the party and further dismayed, as we all are, by the failure to publish the Ford report into the institutional racism in Labour's own structures. Muslim members as well feel increasingly disenchanted by the Labour Party. Just to quote a figure, in the Labour's Muslim Network survey, over 1 in 4 Muslims has direct experience of Islamophobia inside the Labour Party. Over 1 in 3 has witnessed instances of Islamophobia inside the Labour Party. These are the kinds of racism that Labour is not recognising and not facing up to. Here is my own MP, Keir Starmer, in a wide-ranging interview in the New Statesman last week, who said, "The battles we've had in the Labour Party in the last 18 months have pretty well all been about anti-Semitism." They're set up and described as a left-right-centre battle. They're not. I said I was going to tackle anti-Semitism, and we've had to take action. This period covers, remember, the leaked report, the recent Black Lives Matter upheavals, the David Evans bans on discussions, the EHRC report, the purges on those who refuse to accept this diktat. And Evans put it this way: our responsibility to double down on anything that may cause members to continue to feel unwelcome and unsafe must take precedence over our rights at this time. Make who feel unwelcome and unsafe? Which of the many Jewish communities? Or do Evans and Starmer subscribe to the view, the anti-Semitic view, that there is one unified Jewish community with one view, that all Jews think alike? As a suspended member of JVL's committee, Tony Booth put it recently, by making rooting out anti-Semitism their number one priority, they establish a hierarchy of racism and discrimination, which is itself cringingly discriminatory against all vulnerable groups, including against Jews. It just so happens that the trawl for anti-Semites has, as far as we can see, largely netted Jews, including 11 of JVL's 17-member committee. It should be a bad joke, but it is real enough. It is incredibly painful for a single Jewish person to be accused of anti-Semitism, recalling the dark days of what real anti-Semites did to Jews in earlier times: open abuse, foul, life-threatening accusations, exclusion, physical violence, up to and including extermination. Just think, for example, of what that label of anti-Semitism means thrown at one of our committee members, Diana Neslin, an 81-year-old Orthodox Jew, widow, anti-racist all her life. Or of our friend Reva Joffe, a Jewish Labour Party member who died this week with the stain of an anti-Semitism allegation, false of course, hanging over her and without the ability to clear her name. And the many other Jewish activists, Stephen Marks, Joe Bird, Mike Howard, Jenny Manson, Leah Levine, Graham Bash, Heather Mendick, and many, many more. Does the Labour Party not have a duty to make the party a safe and welcoming space for them as well? We have seen anti-Semitism and the legitimate fears of it that all Jews have cynically exploited and manipulated to gain factional advantage in a project that threatens the very future of the Labour Party as a radical force. The so-called struggle against anti-Semitism is in reality largely a phony war, a cover for getting rid of socialists, an excuse for not dealing with the patently visible other racisms that pervade our society and inevitably express themselves in our party too. And it has not made the positions of Jews safer in our party or in the wider society. On the contrary. Thank you very much.